before creation, before light itself, before even the idea of God as something we can even name. Kabbalah speaks of two mysterious realities, Ein Sof and Ayin. Ein Sof means without end, the boundless, infinite divine essence of God. Ayin is nothingness or no-thingness, not emptiness, but something so pure it cannot be grasped by even thought. They are not two different beings, but two perspectives on the same reality. One describes limitless expansion when the other one describes absolute concealment. In this video, today on Chasing the Past, we're going to explore the paradox. How can the infinite be called nothing? And how does nothing become everything? Welcome back to Chasing the Past. Sorry for my voice. These allergies have, kicked me right in the throat. It's just like right up here. I'm like, is it the puzzle? Anyway, this one's a fun one because, again, we've been exploring the series of discovering Kabbalah, and we've been kind of going through if you can divide God into sections, I suppose. But at least in Kabbalah, we can kind of make some inferences. We can dissect some things. And so I got to the point in the Essential Kabbalah, the book that we're going through, and these two separate words also mean the same thing. So when I got to this section, I go, like, what is happening? I go, I thought I learned about this already. And again, in that intro, it's like, oh, these are two perspectives on the same reality, right? Two different ways to look at it. And I wanted to break that down. So technically this was supposed to be a video just on Ayin, which is the nothingness or the no-thingness, right? Not empty, but so pure that it cannot be like, you can't even fathom it in your head. And I go, a good comparison is going to be the video that we did prior about Ein Sof, and then to this one. And so I wanted to be clear on something right at the get-go. And I think it's important to note where, and I get this a lot actually when we talk about Kabbalah, whether it's friends or people who I'm like, hey, have you heard about this? And one of them is, it's just really new, right? It's like a new thing. And I go, well, pieces of it are, but it does kind of originate in this Hebrew language. So if you were describing the idea of like the 12th or the 13th century and you get Ein Sof, then you got it. Congratulations, right? That showed up much later. And so, like I said, 12th, 13th century is when this kind of popped up. But it's more this like theosophical Kabbalah that brings about this word. But Ayin, which is this nothingness or no-thingness, right? That's not a new thing. So, and I thought this was really interesting. And I know it probably is a weird segue, but when I was picking this up, I go, there'd be a cool intersection between, the Hebrew language, like Ayin, for example, and like Egypt. And Egypt has like the Eye of Horus, right? Everyone, you see it as kind of, I didn't even mean to move, right? But it's this flowy kind of, this flow state. But the word in Hebrew means eye. These seem very contradictory, but eye or a natural spring. And I'm like, ooh, the eye, God's watching, the eye of God, right? Eye of Horus, right? There could be a cool intersection. Totally spitballing. I have no idea. But that's cool when I learned it. And it's the 16th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. But it says it I didn't substantiate this, so I'll look it up later, but it says it originated from an ancient pictograph that represents an eye. And then I kind of looked at it and I go, maybe. Yeah, I think maybe. That looks right. And the whole idea is that this Ayin is this perception, right? Maybe an insight or like something with divine observation, right? And, it's this mesh of two ideas. We get this like complementary idea where, it represents God prior to himself manifesting himself. And I thought it was really cool if we could mesh those together and then kind of have a video. And again, apologies. I've been a little down in the weather. Is that a thing? I don't even remember. Oh, I've been down in the weather. That's kind of what it sounds like, something from the South where you're like, well. Anyway, so I wanted to take both of these terms and then separate them for what they are, right? Maybe they do mesh together and they do have an idea of God, but they are technically separate. And when you can use them, how to use them, and then, oh, that's cool. That means something I've never heard of before, which is welcome to the camp. That's what we're doing here. So Ein Sof is without end, right? It's the infinite nature of God, right? The depth, the well, this infinite, you're never going to get there type idea. That's what that word comes to mean. And so Ayin is this nothing. And even in the essential Kabbalah, it's like, it's not nothing, it's not blank, but it's no-thingness. And I was like, whoa, okay. No physical thing, no, right? There's a bunch of ways we can go. But the idea is that this reality, I guess, is not a thing. It's not like a being or an object or something you can like know, or that's limited by human thought, which in itself is just beautiful, like perfect. Like, oh God, yeah, excellent, right? Because many of us can agree that's kind of what God is, right? It's this thing, the universe, it's infinite, you can't touch it, right? Like it touches all these different avenues of thought, and it cannot be known or limited or put in a box. I did a video. A part of my video was talking about we put God in a box to understand him sometimes, and maybe that's just not possible. That's how we just kind of rationalize it, and we go, "That's okay, that's fine," but it doesn't mean that that's the actual truth of what it is or what it is, if it even can be classified as the it. We'll get into it. So based on these two terms, right, there is this, you can call it a paradox, I guess, but we've been talking about the Zohar and some of these Kabbalistic practices, and so these terms might describe God before creation, before God even has a name. But this kind of transcends any understanding that human beings could even, at our max capacity, could try to understand. And so effectively that makes it non-existent, right? We can't even fathom it to the point where our consciousness can't even understand what God would be. And this creation myth that stems from Ayin is from Ayin to Yesh, is what it looks like, but it's from no-thingness, right? So nothingness, but there's just no physical thing to it into something. And so it means that Ayin is not like it doesn't exist. Like there's not nothing, right? It's just there's a state of no-thingness. So it's so pure and has the potential to be filled with existence that it seems like nothing to human beings, which I thought was like, this is so radically different than the idea of like the man in the chair with the beard and the clouds and this kind of idea. And I'm like, that seems like it's a very human built thing to understand. This does not, which is why I also fell in love with it. But both of these words, I think it's important to understand, is that they define the limitless expansion, which is this Ein Sof part, right, the infinite, and Ayin, which is the unknowable essence, the potential, essentially. And so the paradox becomes, okay, how is, this idea of God everything, but also nothing? But then nothing turns into everything, right? That is one sentence that I just sat with for about 20 minutes. I just sat there like this. Interesting. For a good amount of time. And so I think that right out the gate, if we hit this paradox or this thing that's hard to comprehend, right, we're trying our best, but we're not going to get the final answer. But this boundless no-thingness, this idea we have of God, develops intensely into the Kabbalah. And then from, the infinite, you get the 10 Sefirot, right? You get the 10 branches, the emanations, whatever you call it, on God. And then those become physical. And the physical from those manifestations then interact with you, with me, with everybody else. And I think when we look at Ayin, right, we see this, and I think it's hard. Me even trying to say it kind of got hard, but don't clip that. Please don't. Don't do it. But it's the idea that God does not have a name, right? So he has no name. He's just no-thingness. He's understanding it, which also, we'll get into it later, but we're going to go to Genesis 1:1 and the whole, NRSVUE debate where it's like, well, they changed the Bible. And I go, well, did they really change it if that's what it said? Right? We're just changing the public idea of what you think it might have said, which is very different. And I think you can apply that same method to God in this case. But the whole idea is that this no-thingness is the reality so pure, it can't be defined as a thing, right? And then the other attribute or the other piece of God is this Ein Sof, this limitless, it's beyond magnitude, has no boundaries or lack thereof, right? And so my first real question was well, when do I use Ein Sof and then Ayin, right? When do I describe God in those type of ways? When we use Ein Sof, we're describing God's absolute reality, right? Then we go, oh, this divine essence is the only true total reality, right? It's beyond any limitation, right? All of those things fall under this category. We use this word when we discuss the one who emanates the 10 Sefirot, right? The source, the divine attributes of God, right? Then these attributes bring creation into being, right? Then we use this word. When we refer to this infinite light, right? This flowing radiant energy that then sustains the universe, sustains us, and every living being, that's when we use this word. When we talk about Ayin, we focus on humility, self, the limiting self-negation, right? We describe this state of letting go almost, and that ego becomes nothing. And that's a big thing for me. It's most of the time ego does get in the way of stuff, right? It's important in this physical reality to determine what's what, but also it gets in the way a lot. But if we put that away and we become, nothing or no-thingness, right, then we reflect the divine. We radiate with it. We learn from it. We can tap into it potentially. And yeah, we'll just go right into that, because then something I was struggling with is the idea that I know about creation ex nihilo, which is, creating from nothing. And I thought it was interesting that we go, yeah, that's right. But in the text, it does not say that. It reflects more on the Kabbalah than it does on the interpretation of most of Genesis. And if you look at it this way, it could still be creation from nothing. But if it's no-thingness, right, it means that things are just kind of chaotic, right? It's this like undefined state. It's incomprehensible, but when you define it and you put it from, ayin to yesh, right? It's nothing or no-thingness to something, right? You're pulling material almost to make something. That seems more likely and more probable, to be honest, right? And even in the Genesis 1:1, right? And not to jump forward, but the last thing when using ayin is this divine concealment, right? The ultimate hidden, like, void, the womb that is used to create. The state from which things pop up, they emerge. And my first question when I heard about that, because I know about, again, creation ex nihilo, and that is definitely not like a scholarship consensus view. They're like, that's not how it goes. So even though it's framed in this way, it doesn't mean that that's how they're meaning it either, which is great because it means that they probably have a more accurate view on what they're talking about than we do when we go every Sunday to this place. So when you go from nothing, hold on, I've sneezed. When we go from creation from nothing, so it poses a more nuanced, from what I could tell, like pantheistic model based on like emanation theory, right? So creation creation ex nihilo, right? Creation out of nothing is not explicit in the Bible. That's just a given, right? We've become accustomed to it, but that's not how it's written. And so that's a much later, like late 2nd century Christian doctrine that shows up. And to be honest, it is just counteracting this Gnostic idea. Because something common is like, oh my God, this demiurgical character created all of this from nothing. And then now, look, that's where we are, trapped in this physical. So how do you combat that? Well, here you go. And so the more likely view and the more scholarly advice I could give you on what it really means is like when God began to create, which is more along the lines of Ayin, right? This potential, this, you can take this womb almost and pull the resources you need to make something, right? That's in Genesis 1, right at the get-go. But, it's this formless material that gives it's like having, right? You can, like, if I'm a woodworker, let's do it this way. If I'm a woodworking person and I know how to use the material, but it is just all cut and scattered and just hanging out, it's still going to be that same thing. I, as the person, have to turn that material into a desk, right? That's kind of what's going on here. And again, that wasn't till like late 2nd. From what I could find was like it emerged, this ex nihilo, around 200 AD. So the only idea it was supposed to, like, what it was supposed to be is a separation from Christian theology, from Gnosticism, and then ultimately the world around it, so Greek philosophy. And so, there were other ones, right, that had these alternative viewpoints, like creation from pre-existing or unorganized matter, so ex materia, or an interpretation almost of like giving form to this function. And to be honest, there's not a whole lot there if you go to a biblical resource. So granted, it might be a core tenet for modern traditions, but at least in the, if you're Catholic or, if you're Christian in general, I suppose. But It's not the consensus. It's not, no one, they go, no, that's not accurate. And a good video, again, I mention him all the time, but if you're right, you're right. Dan McClellan does a good video on creation ex nihilo in the Bible, and that's a good resource. Hopefully this works out. It should be linked in the bottom. But let's get back to what Ayin could be. So if Ein Sof that we talked about is this boundless, absolute divinity, then Ayin is the potentiality, the void in which the divine source creates, right? So then it may be beyond our, ability to conceive it or form it in our thoughts or even understand, but it just means that we can't define it as something. Does that mean it's not there? No. That doesn't make any sense, right? Because then immediately, again, we're putting it, it's also not a being, right? So I'm having to navigate traditional words I would use for God in a way that's like, well, that's not what we're talking about. But instead, Kabbalah develops this idea of the creation of the universe. And it comes through this self-withdrawal. So God, or infinity itself, creates a space in the divine to create a finite world. So like, I feel like if I'm sitting at this table and I'm going with all these scholars and they're talking about this, it probably sounds something like, how do we define this process? And it goes, well, he probably created a physical space, removed himself, emanated something else in, and then created the physical to interact with the physical. And then you get the 10 rungs of the emanations, the Sefirot. You get these interactions from a physical emanation of God. Not that they're separate, but that they can, almost like if you had a vehicle and you put this emanation in that vehicle, it's like moving around, and then sometimes it can peek through to the physical and then pop back out, or at least understand. Like there's a two-way highway. I didn't go back and forth, right? From here to there, from here to God, from here to infinity, right? It's the ways in which God interacts with us through the emanations that makes it so important. And I went, oh, I get it now. Like, I get it. So, what does this mean in the long-term scale of all these details? It means that creation becomes it becomes the emergence of the world, but not separate from the divine source. So from Ayin, right, this potential that we talked about, then becomes this physical world. And again, from what I could find, many scholars argue that, like, this isn't a new idea either. Like, this Kabbalistic creation idea is essentially just like, it's very Neoplatonic. Or, did I say Neoplatonic? I'm an idiot. It's very Neoplatonic. Thank you. There's this Neoplatonic emanation theory is where, like, a flowing of the divine. Anyway, rather than like this radical ex nihilo creation, like there's nothing and then there's non-existence and then there's existence immediately, it's more like this Neoplatonic emanation theory has this implication. And the implication is that all things are contained within the divine. So like this nothingness comes from a hidden something you can't see. But it's only because human comprehension cannot see this thing, this essence, essentially, this divine essence. And so most scholars don't have an idea of like this ex nihilo radical free act, like this free thing where it's like, oh great, I'm gonna go ahead and do this because I can, I'm God. It's ego's in there, right? It's not that. It's this mystical but also necessary to understand who it is through a continuous emanation of being. And again, then we report, even by existing and living, we report back to source, right? Like, these are not uncommon ideas. And the more I go through it, man, it's pretty intense. It's a lot to think about, a lot to swallow, mentally and physically, because the weather. But the whole idea is that this concept of Ayin is the expression of all things into something. So yes, so the nothingness into something, and then the dependency is on Ayin, this divine hidden force. But they can't go back unless they have Ein Sof, right? So they work together and they're used together to try our best to identify how God may be operating, at least in discovering Kabbalah. But this nothingness is like a very dynamic, creative place. It has limitless potential rather than a lack of substance, which is very different than what you would think of as nothingness. And honestly, it's a better way to describe it, right? That's also how I always see God or the divine or anything related to this, especially in like the modern like emanation theories that are occurring. Like, again, I always go back to Chris Bledsoe. I started with him, I'm still on it, and I'm like, okay, is there a potential that wisdom, Sophia, right, this female aspect, emanation, is talking to this man? When I first started, I said, no, it's demonic. Now I'm like, I was so dumb. I was like, because what I'm doing is, sorry to go on a rant here, but like, what I'm doing is I'm trying to take something that has no words to describe it, take human words, my understanding, quote unquote, putting God in this box because that's easier to deal with than not having anything to deal with. And if there's an encouragement or something I could tell you, it's like, that's normal. Like, there's a normal phenomenon happening. It's because you're used to understanding what you think God would be and having it shattered completely. Because that's kind of how it goes, right? How would you, right? How does something, us, with words that are very finite, we don't even know proper translation amongst human language. How in the world are we going to try to tell someone else even a tiny glimpse of experience about something outside of existence? No-thingness, right? Infinity itself. Logically, if you look at it, there is no way. It just won't work, right? And yet now, I hate to bring up like anything going on in the world, but it means even all these fights, we're fighting all the time about nothing, right? These are all assumptions. We're assuming the right answer is my answer. So you're wrong in your answer. I'm going to fight you for it. Okay, great. That works if it's me and another person, right? That totally works, right? Someone's going to win. Someone's going to win. Someone's going to knock someone out. Someone's going to choke someone out. That's how it's going to work. But if you do that with the potential that we have right now to completely obliterate everything we stand for, every piece of what makes us human, then it's not worth fighting over. Like, just suck it up. Like, that's why I like going through this so much. Because there's no way you will know, I will know, unless we actually do work to figure it out, right? If we operate on these presumptions, these things we think we know, which would be a belief, well then, right? We're operating, because a belief can also be false. Like, I don't think we understand that. Like, we're fighting for, I believe in this, so we're going to fight for it. Well, what happens if it's wrong? What if it's not true at all? You've been told something and it's not true. Someone made that up. Someone did this, someone did that. Then you killed people or did terrible things to others for no reason. It just means nothing at the end of the day. But you can feel good about it because guess what? Well, I have a belief that I'm correct. Yeah, but it doesn't mean that it's still not wrong. Like, that's why I like going through this material, and I love this community, this group that we have. Because that's where we don't get these answers. I feel like we mitigate ego. We push that ego down, and we realize we know nothing, no-thingness, right? And then we also get a little bit of hope, I do, from this discussion, because then it means, oh my goodness, we're made for something. It's not fighting each other, right? It's for this infinity, this potential for God to even take the chance on us to build, to report back through experience, to connect deeper, right? And I think that's way more important, especially now, and way more beautiful than just like, yeah, I'm right, and this is it, and that's that, and that's how it's gonna be. So, do you agree? No. Well, I have to kill you, right? Like, it just makes no sense. Like, go the opposite way. And anyway, long story short. So, Kabbalah does build on this creation ex nihilo, but it's not the nothing, like non-existence that you're used to, or I'm used to, or anybody else is used to hearing all the time. It's only dominant in Western, like, theology, but it's more paradoxical almost, which gives it this mystical, process to it, right? And it means that this creation becomes this transformation. And the transformation is the divine potential in you and me and everything else, every living being, than this random creation from nothing because I wanted to, right? So it does have a less Gnostic twist to it. And yet, when I read through this all, and again, the source material is like the mystical theology of Kabbalah, right? From God to Godhead. And this is going over this medieval period of time. And it seems, I know it doesn't seem complete in the way that we think of completion, but also it's more beautiful that way. And I kind of wanted to leave you guys with that, show you the connection to both of these words, and then how we can maybe apply them in the proper way to our life, to your life. It all has importance. If we realize that, put the ego down low, that sounds like a lyric. Anyway, I think it's more important. So, while these things may just be how do I put this actually? It's more like our perspective on reality is something, but this divine perspective is this Ayin, this potential, is everything, because it created everything. But also, you need to build in a separate space, which would be this no-thingness, right? This void, this infinite potential of creativity to build all these aspects. So that's kind of describing what it means when God is withdrawing. And when he begins to build, you get things like us, all living things, in a way to understand something that seems like a paradox, but yet we exist at the same time. And I guess that kind of rounds off like God's everything and nothing is everything. But I just thought these were cool words to go through, and I appreciate you guys being here. So thank you. It's dinner time. I can hear them running around. I'll see you guys next Tuesday.